How is it going, everyone, and welcome to the first of what I'm sure are going to be many episodes of me reviewing every single film that I saw in the year of 2024. This is the first part, and we're covering months January through March, so you definitely don't want to miss it, and we're just going to get right to the show. But before we do that, if you guys haven't already, please make sure you're subscribing to the show wherever you listen to the podcast, whether it be Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you're listening and watching. Make sure you're leaving me a 5-star rating. Make sure you're subscribing, giving it a thumbs up, leaving in a comment. And with that, we're just going to go right to the show. So now it is time to get spooky. How's it going, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Buddy's House of Horror podcast. And welcome to yet another episode where Buddy gets inevitably way too much screen time. Screen time from a computer recording a podcast, while almost continuous screen time as well with a cellular device, iPhone, looking at my Letterboxd account. Yes, we are once again delving into every single horror film that I have seen in any given year. This particular episode is the first episode covering potentially the worst year of my entire life. Not horror film related, but one of the worst years of my entire life, 2024. And I had a great morning today. Today's going all right. Today is a great day in 2024. I actually went to go get my car fixed because I've been having a little bit of car issues. And the place that I needed to drop my car off is about a half-hour-ish walk from my house on this dreary autumn morning. It is not a warm autumn morning. It is a very cold autumn morning today. So I was not looking forward to potentially having to walk home after dropping my car off. But alas, I checked the Uber app and I checked Lyft. And in order to get a ride, approximately a 3-minute drive to my house, equivalent to like a half-hour-ish walk, it was $16. $16 to get a ride. So, you know what? I braved the cold. I knew that there was a little breakfast spot about at the midway point between the car shop and my home. So I walked 15 minutes, had a delectable breakfast, had multiple cups of warm coffee, and then powered through the rest of the way home. So I had a great morning. I mean, that I would rather spend these $16 on breakfast and coffee than getting a ride. And I was able to have my AirPods. I had a nice walk. I was vibing to the autumn mood. Just a little bit chilly. But it was totally worth it. Hope everything's cool with my car. I guess we'll find out by the end of this podcast. Hopefully I'll find out at some point today what the hell's wrong with my car. But regardless, we're here to talk about films. We're here to talk about horror films. We're here to talk about Letterboxd. In terms of films that I saw this year, it's been a very, very mixed bag. There's definitely been a lot of films that I've rated a bit generously. There's definitely been a lot of films that I've rated a bit poorly. And we're going to get into every single one of those films, boys and ghouls. Every single one of those films we are going to be talking about throughout the course of this podcast series. I don't know how many episodes this is going to be. As you guys know, these podcasts normally take about 2 to 3, sometimes 4 or 5 different episodes to cover the entire year. Just depends on how many films I watched that year, and it depends on how much I really have to say about those films. Coming up first, on January 1st of 2024, Stay Out of the Attic. This film, I don't know if it was a Shudder exclusive or Netflix exclusive, but I definitely watched it on one of those platforms. Not a very high-rated film for me, and not a high-rated film for the audience score as well. This was 80 minutes, so this was the biggest thing that was like, I'm going to watch this film. If it's got a nice 80-ish minute runtime, I'll check it out, most likely. If it looks vaguely interesting and it has a short runtime, I'll be like, all right, bet. Stay Out of the Attic. A diverse group of ex-cons turned movers are convinced by their creepy client, Vern Muller, to pull an all-nighter for a generous pay bump. As the night progresses and rooms are cleared, they slowly uncover the horrors that exist inside his old Victorian mansion, which includes booby traps, human experimentation, Nazi monsters, and more. Will they survive the night? You can check out the film if you want to. I didn't think very highly of it. Again, 2 stars. It's a film that I think is just one step short of fine. There was something missing in it. It didn't score lowly, it didn't rank lowly enough within my brain to give it in the 1-star range. It still looked like it had a little bit of creativity behind it. It looked like it had a little bit of something semblance that they wanted to make a good film here on some level. So I couldn't give it a 1 or a 1.5. But 2 stars still isn't that great of a rating for me. My Letterboxd ratings are a little bit all over the place. Like a 2-star film, that doesn't mean all 2-star films are created equal. This is definitely on the lower end of the 2-star films. But definitely didn't feel compelled enough to give it 1.5 at the time. Maybe we'll give it a 1.5 and give it that extra half star because of the runtime. That 80 minutes is crucial. It's a crucial 80 minutes. Coming up next on the 14th, we're going to be talking about the last film that I watched where I felt like a normal human being. This was on January 14th. This was right before my year took a very, very awful turn. This was the last film that I watched while I felt like a human being. This was Werewolves on Wheels, ladies and gentlemen. This was a hell of a film to go out on as the buddy of past. This was a hell of a film to go out on. Werewolves on Wheels. Of course, this is a film that was watched with Midnight Miles. I believe my wife was there as well. If I check her Letterboxd real quick at the bottom, my wife was there as well. So me, my wife, and Midnight Miles watched the classic 1971 film by Michael Levesque. If you're hairy, you belong on a motorcycle. I mean, I couldn't agree more. I mean, that makes the most sense out of anything I've ever heard in my life. If you are hairy, you do deserve to be on a motherfucking motorcycle. A biker gang visits a monastery where they encounter black-robed monks engaged in worshiping Satan. When the monks try to persuade one of the female bikers, Helen, to become a satanic sacrifice, the bikers smash up the monastery and leave. The monks have the last laugh, though, as Helen, as a result of the satanic rituals, is now possessed and at night changes into a werewolf, with dire results for the biker gang. There's just something about these 70s films, specifically 70s, vibey, biker, sort of films where I just love the aesthetic. I can't get enough of the aesthetic. This was an easy 3-star for me. Yeah, the plot's a little lacking. Yeah, the effects questionable. Yeah, the story very, very questionable. But I love it. There's something about it. I love it. I mean, honestly, there's no way I'm giving it above a 3. But this is a classic, quintessential 3-star film. It checks all my boxes to require 3 stars from the House of Horror. Up next, on the 19th, I remember being over my mother-in-law's house, and she wanted to watch a film entitled The Ginger Dead Man, even though it was after the Christmas season. So definitely not the correct time period to be watching a film called The Ginger Dead Man, but that is in fact what we did. At a cool 70 minutes, this thing trudged on and felt like it was about 700-ish minutes. If I had to guess. Evil never tasted so good. An evil yet adorable gingerbread man comes to life with the soul of a convicted killer. And this real-life cookie monster wreaks havoc on the girl who sent the killer to the electric chair. So it's basically a Child's Play film, only they're possessing a gingerbread cookie. And the people who made this film knew exactly what they were doing, right? They knew they weren't trying to make cinematic gold. They knew that this was just going to be just a fun, quirky little film just to put out, probably straight to DVD at the time. This was 2005. I cannot believe I won't believe that this got a theatrical release. This is a straight to Blockbuster, straight to family video kind of thing. And the score I'm giving it is reflective of that. This is a 1 star. It knew what it was doing. It knew it wasn't trying to make a good film. And like, I'm glad I watched it. I'm glad I got to experience it for the first time. But obviously, it's not something I'm ever going to want to watch or think about ever again in my entire life. And after that, I needed a palate cleanser. After that, I needed like a week to rest up first. But I definitely needed a palate cleanser because the following week, I went to go and re-watch a film in theaters. I very rarely re-watch films in theaters, but I had to go see one of my favorites from 2023, yet again in theaters, this time in black and white. This time, I went to go see Godzilla -1 minus color. Post-war Japan, from 0 to minus. In post-war Japan, Godzilla brings new devastation to an already scorched landscape. With no military intervention or government help in sight, the survivors must join together in the face of despair and fight back against an unrelenting horror. I talked about this film during my last podcast, covering all the films that I watched in the year of 2023, so I'm not going to go on for too long about it here, but this was one of my favorite films of last year, and one of my favorite theater-going experiences of this year. I definitely prefer the black and white version of this. I definitely prefer Godzilla -1 minus color. There is just something about the lack of color that makes it feel so much more timeless. Godzilla looks a lot scarier in black and white. My favorite scene of the film is still the very opening scene where Godzilla is messing up the little aircraft carrier base. The devastation once our hero returns home to find his city completely destroyed. In black and white, it looks absolutely beautiful. The shots out in the water look absolutely beautiful. Like, the whole film in black and white just brings another level of beauty to it. It's not something where they're doing the black and white. I mean, it is a gimmick. They're doing it as a gimmick, but the gimmick doesn't feel like it actually is improving the film, in my opinion. Like, it's not like, oh, we're going to release just a random film in black and white or a random film like this. Like, this feels in tune with the Godzilla lore. Like, this feels, since it is a Godzilla film, the original one was in black and white, and this one sort of goes back to the very, very basics. It makes sense to have the -1 minus color aspect to it. So I really enjoyed it. Again, I enjoy the minus color version better, I think. But obviously, I like both versions. It's still the same film. It's still a 4.5 star film either way. I just give the slight edge to the minus color version. And I only have one more film for the month of January, but January not watching a lot of films. But Miles came over and we watched a film that I would like to maybe do an episode of Hidden Horror on at some point in the future. This is Rawhead Rex. He's pure evil, pure power, pure terror. Ireland will never be the same after Rawhead Rex, a particularly nasty demon, is released from his underground prison by an unwitting farmer. The film follows Rex's cross-country rampage while a man still struggles to stop it. I thought this film, for what it was, just kind of a cheesy 80s creature feature, was about as good as you can get for me in that genre. This is, again, another easy 3-star film. It's cheesy, it's campy, but it is a ton of fun. It is a ton of fun. I love the characters in the film. I love the look of Rawhead Rex. I love the setting. There's a lot of scenes where Rawhead Rex, he's a demon. He's taken over and he's fucking up these churches. There's lots of, like, legend involved in this, and I really dug the story. I really dug the creature effects. Obviously not something that's going to rank 4 or 5 stars for me, but I did enjoy the film quite a lot. It's one that I would like to rewatch. It is one that I'd like to potentially do an episode of Hidden Horror about in the future. But that wraps up our month of January. January is under wraps. January is in the past. I'm definitely never going to have to think about anything that happened in my life in January of 2024 ever again. But anyway, moving on to the month of February. The first films of February were actually a double feature of sorts. One in theaters, and then one taking a trip back to the Midnight Manor and watching another film on a digital video disc. A DVD! Watching another film on DVD, one in theaters. The first film that I saw in the year of February 2024. The first film is Out of Darkness, a film that I saw in theaters with Midnight Miles, the Midnight Mandroid, a film where I was very, very unimpressed. Out of Darkness, the dawn of man, the birth of fear. In the old Stone Age, a disparaged gang of early humans band together in search of a new land. But when they suspect a malevolent, mystical being is hunting them down, the clan are forced to confront a danger they never envisioned. This film was very bland. I did not like this film at all. Miles obsessed with it. Miles, 5-star, ultimate classic. It's just not that interesting to me. There's a bunch of prehistoric people walking around in a language that they made up, and it's them trying to survive. And there's some twists and turns in the story. Not going to get too much into it here. But very unimpressed. I never ever see myself necessarily watching it again. One of the worst films I saw this year, not necessarily poorly made or anything like that. It was just not my cup of tea. Just something very, very uninteresting to me. One thing I did notice within the ending credits of the film that I took note of, because obviously this film was shot post-2020, and I mean, I watch the credits in nearly every single film that I watch, but I don't know if this was the first time I saw this in the credits, but I definitely took note of it. The COVID quartermaster is a credited role in this film. So I'm going to have to start paying more attention to more films that were shot basically directly post-COVID to see if this COVID quartermaster thing appears in more of the credits. I'm assuming it's some sort of health monitor, probably the person that takes everyone's temperature every day and has like basically on-set, like, nurse-type things going on. But COVID Quartermaster, that is a new one. I would like to apply to be the COVID Quartermaster on a film set coming up very soon. That sounds like a lot of fun. But later on, we saw the film, went back to Midnight Miles' house, and watched a film that we have talked about already for the Hidden Horror series, Toad Road. I'm not going to go too deep into my personal thoughts and feelings about Toad Road because, as you guys already know, we did an entire episode about Toad Road already. But just to hype you up to listen to the full episode if you haven't listened to it yet, Toad Road is from 2012, directed by Jason Banker, at a cool 76 minutes. Stuck in a dead-end town, young James kills times with his druggy friends, engaged in debauched chemical intake to the point of unconsciousness, until he meets Sarah, a sweet new arrival to their group. However, Sarah wants James to take her further into the world of narcotics experimentation, just as James was contemplating abandoning this lifestyle. And she also wants him to introduce her to the sinister local legend of Toad Road, a spot deep in the forest that apparently is home to the 7 gates of hell. I love the skinny jeans. I love the emo hair. I love the look and feel of this film. It reminds me of my late teens and my early 20s. The way they're playing music in a basement. The way that they dress. The way that they look. Just everything about the film is very, very reminiscent of growing up in the Midwest during this time period around the same time that I was growing up. Obviously, not myself being involved in chemical narcotics and all the insane drugs and shrooms that these people were doing within this film. But everything else about that time period is something that's just so very, very nostalgic to me that I really loved this film. Like I said, it's super nostalgic. There are a lot of dark elements within this film, a lot of dark history behind the making of behind the scenes of this film. But that is a podcast for another day, or maybe today if you want to listen to it after this, because that episode is already out. We did a full episode about Toad Road. So definitely go and check that out if you have not seen it already. Next film I watched is American Movie, yet again. My favorite day of the semester is always watching American Movie with the kids in the college course that I teach. So I always talk about American Movie on this podcast twice a year because I end up watching it twice a year every single year. Of course, directed by Chris Smith, who has just come out with his newest documentary about Vince McMahon that is up on Netflix. I've seen the first episode so far. I still need to go back and watch the rest of it. But it's spooky season. I'm watching tons of horror films. Like, a documentary about wrestling right now is not something that is really fitting into a lot of the stuff that I'm watching. But I have seen the first episode. I'm hoping in November, once I have all the spookiness out of my system for at least a day or two, I can pick up with the rest of the Vince McMahon documentary. But regardless, American Movie is the story of filmmaker Mark Borchardt, his mission and his dream. Spanning over 2 years of intense struggle with his film, his family, financial decline, and spiritual crisis, American Movie is a portrayal of ambition, obsession, excess, and one man's quest for the American dream. One of my few 5-star films on Letterboxd, so one of the few films that I've given 5 stars to. I think it's an absolute masterpiece. Again, it is not a horror film, but it focuses on the making of several horror films, of the making of Northwestern, and eventually the making of Coven or Coven. But no, Coven sounds too much like oven, man. That just doesn't work. One of my favorite films ever. I love it. I love introducing it to the students every semester. Definitely with mixed results. Every semester I've watched it, it seems like the kids are enjoying it less and less and less. The first semester I showed the film, you could have thought I was playing like the funniest stand-up comedy special of all time. The kids were hooting and hollering, having a great time. And every semester it just seems like the kids are vibing with it a little bit less and less as the kids in the class keep getting born later and later and later. I mean, all the kids are always the same age. They're around 20 years old. But each year I'm getting a kid that's born not from the year 2000, but the year 2001 and the year 2002. So, like, every year the kids are getting younger. It's resonating with them less and less and less. But I'm going to keep showing it because it's very important. It's a film that I think every film student needs to watch. And actually, this is a nice segue because after we watched that film in class, my wife and I decided to go and see a film in theaters. And unbeknownst to me, one of my students was working at the movie theater, so I actually went and purchased my popcorn from one of my students who was just with earlier in the day. So that was a trip. This film, directed by Zelda Williams, daughter of the illustrious Robin Williams, and named after the Legend of Zelda, so obviously an icon in her own right, directed her directorial debut, Lisa Frankenstein. If you can't meet your perfect boyfriend, make him. In 1989, a misunderstood teenager has a high school crush who just happens to be a handsome corpse. After a set of playfully horrific circumstances bring him back to life, the two embark on a murderous journey to find love, happiness, and a few missing body parts along the way. I really love this film. I thought this film was a good, fun ride, a good, solid watch, a good 3.5 stars. Not something I really see myself revisiting too often, but I love, obviously, the merch the kids are wearing. I obviously love the 80s style, the aesthetic, the new age music that they're listening to. I like Cole Sprouse's performance. I love the performance of our main actor, Catherine Newton, as well. She's great. I love the bully characters. I love the little stupid kid who has a crush on her, the little short king. I just thought the film was fun. From front to back, it was very, very fun. I kind of saw this at the end of its theater run, I think. I think me and my wife were the only ones in the cinemas at the time actually watching it. But it was a great time. We need to normalize more films where the main character does not speak. We need to, where the main male lead does not speak. The main male lead in a lot of films is always getting himself into fucking trouble. Just don't let him talk, at least until maybe the very end. But this film was a blast. I really liked it. I really liked the aesthetic. I think had it gotten more of a mainstream kind of run, maybe if it had a little bit more of a budget to it, this would be another Halloween classic. And I mean, who's to say it won't be? Who's to say in a few years from now it's not going to be rewatched? Maybe not as much as your Hocus Pocuses and Beetlejuices and stuff like that, but I definitely think that this fits in with that uh, similar, lighthearted, but kind of edgy, kind of spooky, scary content. Again, this one is a little bit more violent than those films, obviously. This one is definitely for a little bit of a more mature audience as opposed to some of those films. But as your kids are, turning 10, 11 years old, I mean, this is perfectly fine for them to watch, probably. But I definitely see like a future like cult classic in this film. It's a film that I'm very fortunate that I was able to see it in the theater. And I'm very fortunate I was able to check it out with my wife. I mean, we had a great time watching it. So, coming up next are several films that I watched at home. I didn't make it back to the theater for a few days, but I watched a lot of films in between that. So we're going to get into some of the films that I watched alone, at home, in my home. The first film in my at-home movie extravaganza away from the theater for a few days is Revenge of the Creature, which I remember watching on VHS again. I believe I watched this late last year, wanted to check it out for a second time, just for kind of vibes and aesthetics. Like every once in a while, when I'm upstairs hanging out in the movie room, I'll just want to pop on a VHS or something just to have going on in the background while I'm doing other things up there. In the case of this, it was Revenge of the Creature. Yet again, all new thrills, shocks, suspense. In the tributary of the Amazon, a monster, half man, half fish, is captured and placed in a reservoir in a Florida national park to be observed by scientists. Of course, things go amok from there. Again, I talked about this in my 2023 episode as well, so I'm not going to harp too much about it, but it is a fun, enjoyable film. Obviously, not a major classic or anything, but a good, solid watch every time I put it on. It's a nice movie to kind of have on. I love when the monster is in the zoo, everyone's observing him, and they're just like, wow, be a shame if he got loose. And then, of course, he ends up getting loose, obviously. Next film I watched is a film I actually finished watching on this day, the 22nd of February. This film, it took me forever to finish it, and I guess that's sort of a testament to how I feel about the film, because it wasn't something I was incredibly gripped with all the way around. This is Destroy All Neighbors. A good film, a solid film that I enjoyed watching, but it took me like 3 or 4 different times to make it through this thing. Like I'd watch a little bit of it, pick it up a few days later, watch a little bit, pick up with it a week later. So this is the day I finally finished it. Like I think like off and on it took me about a month to watch this movie. But of course this was a new release, straight to Shudder, I believe. William Brown, a neurotic, self-absorbed musician determined to finish his prog rock magnum opus, faces a creative roadblock in the form of a noisy and grotesque neighbor named Vlad. Finally working up the nerve to demand that Vlad keep it down, William inadvertently decapitates him, but while attempting to cover up the murder, William's accidental reign of terror causes new victims to pile up and become undead corpses who torment and create more bloody detours on his road to prog rock Valhalla. One of the opening lines in this film is this dude fucking talking about Tool and listening to Tool. So already I'm just like, damn, fucking prog rock, new metal, fucking legend of the era. Again, this film had a lot of funny moments in it. It had a lot of good effects, had a lot of very, very comedic moments. Like it gives me similar, vibes to stuff like Reanimator, Dead Alive. It's sort of like a throwback to those horror comedies. It is very enjoyable. One day I would like to sit down and watch it in its entirety, because it's kind of hard to give it a good rating or to really be a fair judge of it when I'm only watching it in bits and pieces. Like I said, I would watch like maybe 20-ish minutes of it at a time. Just for some reason, like, I was compelled to keep watching it. Like, there's lots of movies that, like, I'll put on, not vibe with it, and shut it off. I was compelled to keep watching it, but for whatever reason, I couldn't. And I mean, granted, this was a very busy time for me, but, like, granted, I couldn't get myself to sit down and watch the whole thing. So I finally finished watching it on the 22nd. On the 23rd, Another glimpse into the VHS catalog of Buddy's House of Horror. I checked out for the third time on my Letterboxd, apparently my third time rating it. I had to have watched this more than 3 times, but only 3 times with Letterboxd. House of Frankenstein. 71 minutes of pure fucking campy terror. All the screen's titans of terror together in the greatest of all screen sensations. Deranged scientist Gustav Niemann escapes from prison and overtakes the director of a traveling chamber of horrors, soon reviving the infamous Count Dracula, the frozen Frankenstein monster, and the Wolfman. It's kind of 2 horror films in one. There's the beginning segment at the horror exhibit where the guy says he has Dracula's skeleton and the skeleton becomes revived into Dracula. That's a separate film. And then there is the second half, which feels like another film featuring the Frankenstein monster and the Wolfman. Dracula does not interact with the other 2 monsters. His storyline's already wrapped up midway through the film, and then you have another film at the end. So it's kind of like 2 35-ish minute films put together into one 70-minute film. And I do enjoy the film. I do think it's a lot of fun. It's not one of my all-time great Universal monster films, but it is a good solid watch. It has John Carradine as Dracula within the film. Of course, Larry Talbot himself, Lon Chaney Jr., reprises his role. Boris Karloff is in it. J. Carroll Naish is in it. I really love the film. I believe this is like Boris Karloff's last outing in a Frankenstein film within Universal. I really like the film. I like the film a lot. I've talked about it on other shows that I'm sure that you've heard before. And yeah, I just really, really dig it. It's a lot of fun, and I really don't know what else to say about it. This is also I think Glenn Strange played Frankenstein a couple times. So he does another solid job in this as well. And then the day after, I watched one of my favorite horror films of the 60s for the second or third time, 2 times on Letterboxd. But for the second or third time, I watched The City of the Dead again at home on video on my VCR. Loved watching VHS in February, apparently. 300 years old, human blood keeps them alive forever. The City of the Dead from 1960, directed by John Moxey, same director of Kolchak, the original film, The Night Stalker. A young college student arrives in a sleepy Massachusetts town to research witchcraft. During her stay in an eerie inn, she discovers a startling secret about the town and its inhabitants. This is one of my favorite witch films of all time. It's one of my favorite films from the 60s, as I mentioned. Christopher Lee stars in the film as the professor character in this. It has a lot of great quotes within the film. It has so much fog. It has so much aesthetic. It's known as Horror Hotel in America when it was released over here as well. So it goes by 2 titles. So you may have heard of it under the second title as well. I always call it City of the Dead. I think it's a much better, less generic title for the film. I can't get enough of it. As I said, it's one of my favorite films from that time period, sort of bridging the gap between the 60s and the 50s. Again, this was probably shot in the late 50s and then released in 1960. 1960, hell of a year for horror. City of the Dead, Psycho, Black Sunday. I love this year. I love this year of film. 1960 is a great, great year for the horror film. I would love to do a full episode about the City of the Dead on the show, like a full review, or maybe even a top list of my top 10 horror films from the 60s or something like that. But after that, my VHS extravaganza in February was over temporarily. Well, for February was over, I watched a bunch of stuff after that. We're talking a film that I saw in theaters, and it ended up being one of my lesser favorites of the year, like one of the least favorite things I watched in theaters this year. I still found it decent enough. It's still a 2.5-star film, which I think is a fine film. But given the title of the film, given some of the context of the stuff that is in the film, I was vaguely disappointed with it. I was pretty disappointed in the film stop motion. Because I love stop motion. I mean, obviously, if you're a long-time listener of the show, I talk about Wallace and Gromit quite a bit. I love the art of stop motion. I used to do stop motion style films with action figures when I was a kid. I love the art form. I love the medium. But as far as the film itself, I was a little bit disappointed in it. Bring your nightmares to life. Ella Blake, a stop motion animator struggling to control her demons after the loss of her overbearing mother, embarks upon the creation of a film that becomes the battleground for her sanity. As Ella's mind starts to fracture, the characters in her project take on a life of their own. Obviously, some supernatural stuff going on here with the stop motion creatures. I wish there was more of the stop motion stuff actually coming to life and wreaking havoc and stuff like that. A lot of this plays out more psychologically. It's her trying to finish her mother's film after her mother passes away. Her mother was very overbearing to her. Her mother always made it sound like she was not going to be good enough. All of her friends are also stop motion artists, so all of her friends adore her mother, think she's a genius and stuff like that. She's trying to get her start in the business, not only tasked with finishing what would become her mother's final work, but also to make her own name within the world of stop motion. I didn't know stop motion filmmakers had this much of an underground cult following in whatever this town is. Like, there's stop motion studios, they all work out. In the apartment building where she's shooting her opus, shooting her film, there is a young child who is actually giving her all of the plot points for the film. So she's really the brains behind the operation. So even in her creating her own film, she's really trying to... She wants to make a name for herself, but she's also just doing whatever this kid tells her to do in the film. She's so used to her mother telling her everything. She feels like she doesn't have all these creative ideas. She can't do it on her own. So she's begging this kid to tell her like the next part of the story, and she's animating it. So I like a lot of the film, but just like something about it, just like everything really like misses the mark in a lot of regards. But I do find myself liking the film. I wish I would have loved it more. Again, it was something I would want to rewatch. But for whatever reason, it didn't really hit all the marks it needed to mark with me. I was vaguely disappointed about it when I did see it. But that's the last one for February. So we're moving on to the great month of March, the month of my birth. And we're starting out with 100 Years of Horror, The Count and Company, which is part of a VHS set I have of all of the installments of 100 Years of Horror. Of course, I'm going to start with the vampire one. Of course, I'm going to start with the one about Dracula. And it deals with... It's documentary format. It's hosted by Christopher Lee. And it's basically a clip show of a bunch of vampires throughout film history. This was made in 1996, so obviously there's nothing after 1996. But basically, since the dawn of cinema, up until then, it covers all kinds of different vampire films. It features interviews, stuff like that, clips from all these films. So it's a very, very solid documentary. This is the only one out of that VHS box set that I've watched so far, but they've got one about the Frankenstein monster, obviously. They've got one about werewolves. They've got all kinds of shit. I think there's one about witches. So it isn't just the Universal monster. It's just some of them are just monsters in general. So I definitely look forward to watching the rest of these. They're all only about 45-ish minutes each, the episodes. I mean, I would imagine a lot of these originally aired on television with commercial breaks that makes it about an hour. So I do look forward to watching the rest of the ones in this VHS set. And yeah, there's not a ton to say about it. I mean, it's just a cool documentary. I have a lot of vampire documentaries and Frankenstein documentaries on VHS that I like to watch from time to time. So this was a good one to finally check out, because again, I've had the box set for a while, but never watched any of the tapes in it. So I was excited to do that. All right, coming up next in the month of March is the 2018 film Unsane. Not the biggest fan of the title of Unsane. Reminds me of Man Unkind by Metallica. But as I said, this is from 2018, directed by Steven Soderbergh. Of course, the mastermind behind Aaron Brockovich, the Ocean's films. Magic Mike is one of his all-time classics, obviously. And this is a dabble into the world of horror. Very leaning towards the psychological thriller aspect of it, but in my opinion, a horror film nonetheless. Is she or isn't she? A woman is involuntarily committed to a mental institution where she is confronted by her greatest fear. Again, there are some aspects of this that make you wonder if she is insane or unsane. I don't want to unravel a lot of the plot context going on with this because there are lots of twists and turns within the story. One thing you're going to notice immediately upon watching this film is that it looks a little bit different than maybe some films you would be watching normally. I didn't realize this going in because I knew about this originally. Originally, I knew about this, but in between the years of 2018 and now when I finally watched it, I forgot that this was shot entirely on an iPhone. So that explains why during it I was like, this looks a little bit different than most mainstream films I would watch or even indie films that I watch. It just had a real different kind of look to it. And it turns out it's because it was shot all on an iPhone 7. And it kind of looks like it was shot on an iPhone 7, for better or for worse. I do think it does make the film have a unique sort of look to it. I do think that since it does take place in like a mental institution, it was an interesting choice. It kind of has it look a little bit if you don't know if you're going insane or not. Like it has a very unique sort of look to it. I really enjoy the look of the film. So I don't necessarily want every film I watch to be shot on an iPhone 7, obviously. But within the context of this film, it does work. So I dig it. Again, it's a very unique, sort of horror film, which I enjoyed for probably only a one-time watch. I gave it 3 stars, so it is good. But not necessarily something I need to come back to time and time again. Next film I watched is a film that I have seen a plethora of times. I've logged it 3 times on Letterboxd, and I've definitely seen it at least twice that many times prior to Letterboxd. This is The Crow. 1994's The Crow, of course, a film that has been remade this year, for better or for worse. We will be talking about The Crow remake when we get to that particular film within the chronology of 2024. But this is the original. Believe in Angels. Exactly 1 year after young rock guitarist Eric Draven and his fiancée are brutally killed by a ruthless gang of criminals, Draven, watched over by a hypnotic crow, returns from the grave to exact revenge. One of the greatest comic book-ish, horror, dark, supernatural, fucking vigilante films of all time. One of my favorites of all time as well. The music hits, the aesthetic hits. The shots in this are so gothic and so cool. Like, you can take a frame from this film and hang it on your wall. Like, I love the use of color, shadows. I love the way that it's very uniquely its own film. I love the way that the film looks. And again, that's something that's very lacking with the remake of it, obviously. This first one is just so unique. It so is what it is. It's very hard to replicate without directly like copying it. So I understand they did have some challenges along the way. Like you're following up in what my mind is not one of my favorite films of all time, but definitely one of those few like quintessential, it is what it is, masterpiece kind of films. Again, not one of my like personal favorites, but regardless, like a phenomenal film. It's a 4-star classic. I'm definitely going to be watching it time and time again throughout the years. This is my wife's like favorite film of all time. So I watch this film a lot. She watches it more than I do. I'm not always with her when she watches it. I'm sure she has a lot more Letterboxd ratings of it than I do. A few more times that she's viewed it besides without me being there. But phenomenal film. She's rated it 4 times on Letterboxd. I was just checking those for sure. But she's definitely seen it more times than that because she's seen it before she has Letterboxd too. But what is there to say about the film that hasn't already been said? Obviously, tragic history with the film. But I love the film. I mean, I'm probably going to end up watching it next year as well. Next film that I saw on the 21st is the highly controversial at the time Late Night with the Devil. And at the time of recording this, I have not done it yet, but I do plan on doing a full review of Late Night with the Devil. I plan on rewatching the film, not in a theater setting, and because I thought it was one of my favorite films of the year. So I want to watch it again. I want to dissect my thoughts about it. But do not adjust your set. A live broadcast of a late-night talk show in 1977 goes horribly wrong. unleashing evil into the nation's living rooms. I had a phenomenal time watching this film. Phenomenal time watching this film. I went to see it in a theater. I got myself personal pan pizza, popcorn, a cold soda pop, and I was ready to roll. I really enjoyed watching this film in theaters. When I was in the parking lot of the film, getting ready to go in, I saw all the controversy that was about to be surrounding it because I saw this on opening night, but a little bit later on in the day, I believe. So some people had already seen it. And a lot of people were complaining about the use of AI within the film. So I was debating on even going and watching it. Like, I was in the parking lot, like, debating whether or not I wanted to go in and support a film with the use of AI. Because AI, especially in film and especially at that exact time when it was coming out, it was a huge hot button issue. But I had already purchased my ticket. And I was like, fuck it, I'm just going to go in, judge the film for what it is. And my opinion of it is the AI in the film is just lazy. Like, they should have just not done that. They could have paid a high school or a college kid just to do some artwork for this. Like, it was just a stupid way to cut corners. Like, I don't think it's anything that's worth boycotting within this film specifically. Like, AI in general, like, yes, and I understand that it's a slippery slope. But within the context of this film, like, it's not anything that's going to ruffle too many feathers. Like it did, I think it was blown a little bit out of proportion. Like they're just using the AI as little transitions between the commercial breaks. It's not like it's anything that's a major plot focus or they're using it to doctor up footage and do this, that, and the other thing. So in general, I just think it was kind of lazy. I think it was kind of stupid. Like I think that, I don't know. I wish they didn't make those decisions, but I don't think it's anything worth like boycotting the film over. But that is just my own personal opinion about it. Again, I do plan on doing a full rewatch of the film and doing a more in-depth review about it because it was one of my favorite films of the year. But that's all I really have to say about it at this time. Next, I watched for how many times on Letterboxd do I have this rated? For the second time rating on Letterboxd, but obviously seen it a billion fucking times before that, 2008's Twilight, the original. When you can live forever, what do you live for? When Bella Swan moves to a small town in the Pacific Northwest, she falls in love with Edward Cullen, a mysterious classmate who reveals himself to be a 108-year-old vampire. Despite Edward's repeated cautions, Bella can't stay away from him, a fatal move that endangers her own life. Obviously takes place in Forks, Washington. To date this podcast just a little bit, I just saw a TikTok today where they spotted Bigfoot just outside of Forks, Washington. So was it Bigfoot or was it Jacob Black? We don't know. What is there for me to say about Twilight? It's probably my second or third favorite within the franchise because Eclipse is my favorite. It's debatable if I like the original Twilight better or Breaking Dawn Part 2 better. I'd probably have to give the edge to the original Twilight. So I think this is probably my second favorite within the franchise. When you look at the Letterboxd ratings, the scores are kind of all over the place. There's people who love it. There's people who hate it. It's pretty solid across the board. There's definitely a big dip in the half-star and the 4.5-star range, but everything else like looks pretty solid, pretty even across the board. So not a lot of 4.5s, but a lot of people are going straight to the 5 for this one. But I guess when you look at the little graph here, the 3-star is the highest. I rated the film 3.5. What is there for me to really say about Twilight? I've talked about Twilight billions of fucking times on all of my shows. I want to do a Twilight podcast. I want to do a full Twilight podcast breaking down everything within this illustrious franchise. But that is a podcast for another day. For the next film, we're talking about Adam Wingard's sequel to his other film about Godzilla. This is Godzilla x Kong, The New Empire. Rise together or fall alone. Following their explosive showdown, Godzilla and Kong must reunite against a colossal undercover threat hidden within our world, challenging their very existence and our own. This isn't really a horror film, but it's giant monsters, so I'm going to count it regardless. I talked about Godzilla Minus One earlier in this show and on other shows that I think is a masterpiece. Godzilla vs. Kong, The New Empire I gave it 3 stars. Gave it 3 stars, which is mainly for nostalgic value. Well, I don't want to say nostalgic value. Mainly because I love Godzilla so much that I didn't really see myself giving this below 3 stars. But I can acknowledge this is not a strong film. I can acknowledge that the human story in this is pretty insane and ridiculous and stupid. I can admit a lot of the monster stuff in this is pretty insane and ridiculous and stupid too. I do like that Kong is given more of a central focus in this. He definitely is the main character of this film. So although there is a lot of human stuff, we do see a lot of monster storylines within this as well. I would personally love just a film of Kong in the center of the earth, just doing whatever it is. Don't even fucking use the humans at all. And we got proof of that when Kong is with all the other fucking Kongs. And they're able to emote. You're able to see their emotions. They're able to be characters. We don't need the human characters in this fucking franchise anymore. Just have it be Kong and Baby Kong just fucking doing their thing. And Godzilla comes in every once in a while. We don't even really need the humans. If you're going to use humans in this Godzilla franchise going forward, just use them like fucking Mr. Martin from fucking the original. Just have him kind of narrate what's going on. Like, at this point, I'm fucking done with these stupid human stories. They got the dude who's essentially a Titan dentist, Dan Stevens, Jared's favorite actor of all time, who every film that he's in, like, he does a good job and everything, but, like, I don't like a lot of this man's fucking, what's it called? A lot of his filmography. I acknowledge he's good, but, like, I don't know, man. Like, for some reason, he's in a ton of films that are just very, very mediocre to me. So I don't know. He just makes mediocre film selections to be in my opinion. We got to talk about Scar King, obviously. As soon as you see this motherfucker in the trailers, like, you know it's a fucking joke. That's my biggest thing with this. Like, you can tell that there are no goddamn stakes. This dude does not stand a chance against Godzilla and Kong. This dude stands zero chance against these guys. Like, literally, they just give him the business. Like, there is no back and forth. There's no, it's gonna be close or anything like that. Like, he gets the fucking shit beat out of him. So, it is fun. It's funny. Like, I like the monster action, obviously, but I wish the villain was a little bit more menacing. We need to get some more Godzilla-type villains in here instead of making up new ones. We need to get fucking Gigan in there. We need to get the Smog Monster in there. We need to do something that poses more of a threat. We need something that poses a threat. I thought that, I don't know, just for me, I felt like no stakes. I felt no form of suspense or anything because I knew this dude was just going to get the shit beat out of him. Like, there was no fucking way that he stood a chance against Godzilla or Kong, let alone together. So, I don't really know what else to say about it. I do look forward to what goes on next in the franchise. I do obviously want to see Godzilla and Kong go on some more adventures, but I want the adventures to feel more important. I want the adventures to feel like they have stakes, and this I did not feel any stakes within this film. Rounding out the month of March, I watched an entire franchise that I intend on ranking at some point, but I watched the entire Night of the Demons franchise with another film mixed in that I went to go see in theaters. So be prepared for me to talk about Night of the Demons 1, 2, 3, and 4. Well, the fourth one is a remake, but with another film to break it up. So we're going to go into a little Night of the Demons mini deep dive just for a moment with one film in between to break it up. So obviously we're talking about the original film from 1988. This is Night of the Demons, the original. Angela is having a party. Jason and Freddy are too scared to come, but you'll have a hell of a time. So Jason Voorhees and Freddy Krueger, too scared, but you should show up. When partygoers at a deserted funeral home decide to have a seance on Halloween night, they awaken something evil with a thirst for blood. I've ranked this twice on Letterboxd. I believe I've seen it maybe one other time prior to that. But I think this film's great. I think it's one of the best 80s sort of horror films that I have, like, no problem in recommending it to anybody. Like, I think that this is a good, solid flick that everyone who is a fan of the genre should watch. Of course, Leanna Quigley is great as Suzanne. Of course, Angela is great within this film. I love the comedy with all the kids in the house. There's actually like some pretty unique shots in this film that they have. I love when they're kind of like circling around the room when they're telling the stories and stuff like that. Of course, the effects are great. It's just a fun like party atmosphere. Like I really love the film. It's a nice essential 80s haunted house film. The second film, however, although I think I gave it the same rating, I did. I gave Night of the Demons 2 the same rating. I think the second film is even better than the first. So Night of the Demons 2, Angela's throwing another party. Trick or treat, sucker. Angela, the hostess from hell, summons her army of teen demons when teenagers from St. Rita's High School decide to have a party at a haunted Hull House on Halloween. I think I like this film more just because, I don't know, I find the setting a little bit more interesting. Like, I find that they're in the haunted house for basically the entire time in the first film. The second film, we get to see a lot more of what is going on. Like, we get to see the students. I believe they're college students, actually. No, they're high school students. I don't know why I was having doubts. I just read it. But you get to see a lot of stuff going on at the school. You get to see a lot of the stuff. I like, obviously, everything that takes place within the haunted house. But I like that this one has a lot more, like, world building to it. Again, a lot of creative kills, a lot of creative special effects. It's really great. I really like it a lot. Of course, they have Amelia, who plays Angela, coming back for this. This was several years later. But it feels like it picks up right where the last one left off. Like, this was in 94, but it still feels like a classic 80s film. So this is really, I mean, when you look at it, this is one of my favorite 90s horror films, because the 90s, in my opinion, weren't super great for horror. But Night of the Demons 2 is definitely a solid entry in that list. The next day, I went to a movie theater to go see a new release film called Immaculate. So we'll talk about that, and then we're going to pick up with Night of the Demons 3 and the remake. Also, before I talk about this, I just want to give out to a shout out to one of my employees, actually, JR, who demanded that I watch these Night of the Demons films. So he actually let me borrow 2 and 3 on Blu-ray, which he owns. So he actually brought them to me so I could check them out. So just wanted to acknowledge him for a second, shout him out that he let me watch those. So those I watched one night. The following night, I did a triple fucking feature. I went to the cinemas and then I watched Night of the Demons 3 and the remake. But we're going to talk about Immaculate first. So not every intervention is divine. An American nun embarks on a new journey where she joins a remote convent in the Italian countryside. However, her warm welcome quickly turns into a living nightmare when she discovers her new home harbors a sinister secret and unspeakable horrors. This film is another film I gave 3.5 stars. Very, very solid film. Stars Sydney Sweeney, of course. And the one thing I'll say about this film is it does come off rather predictable. And this is a problem I have with 2024 horror in general. There are a lot of films that came out this year that look and feel kind of the same and kind of have the same plots. Like this film and The First Omen are very, very similar. It's also very, very similar to a film that came out later on, although it takes place in a different atmosphere, like a different setting. Cuckoo comes off very, very similar to this film as well. So I was just kind of burnt out on these storylines by the time I made it to Cuckoo. But Immaculate was the first one I saw. So this time it was pretty fresh. Again, it deals with a lot of religious elements in it. Very, very predictable. But like you can see all the twists and turns coming, but that doesn't mean the journey isn't fun to get there. The ending scene is amazing. There's a lot of elements in this film that I really like. It was one of my favorites of this year, obviously 3.5 stars. I can see myself rewatching it, and I'm not exactly sure when I would rewatch it, but it's definitely a film I'd be open to watching Again, I did like it quite a lot. So those are my thoughts on Immaculate. Again, not going into a lot of the specific plot elements of it. But just know, if you see Immaculate and then you see The First Omen, you're going to see a lot of similarities. And then if you see Cuckoo, you're just going to be burned out. You are going to be burned out with the implications that this story has. But Night of the Demons 3, however, was another film I watched that day, obviously. This one definitely a lot worse in quality in terms with the first two films. Night of the Demons 3 kind of, I don't know what to say. Like, it's definitely, you can tell it was a lot more cheaply made. But a lot of it is still enjoyable to me. The third film, like the scene that's always going to stick out to me is the scene where they go and they rob the store. Like, that scene is sort of burned into my brain. It's a lot of fun. But what do I think of the whole film? Angela is back and she's ready to party down to hell. When a group of rambunctious teens take refuge in Hull House to escape the law, they soon realize their grave error is upon meeting Angela. Of course, Amelia is returning again to reprise her role as Angela for the last time. And I would say it goes out with a bang, but as I said, this one is the least memorable out of all of them for sure. It's the shortest one out of all of them. It definitely feels a bit rushed. This was in 97, so kind of like, again, we're getting deep into the 90s. We're getting deep into a sort of weird era of cinema. But I still like the film. I like this franchise as a whole. I love the poster for this film where she's drinking the martini with the eyeballs on it. I think that's iconic. One of the most famous posters of I just love the posters of the Night of the Demons franchise. Like, I think the imagery in them is very, very iconic. But this last film, this Night of the Demons remake from 2009, it's something interesting for sure. All hell is going to break loose. Angela is throwing a decadent Halloween party at New Orleans' infamous Broussard Mansion. But after the police break up the festivities, Maddie and a few friends stay behind. Trapped inside the locked mansion gates, the remaining guests uncover a horrifying secret and soon fall victim to 7 vicious, bloodthirsty demons. I don't really know what to say about this film positively. Edward Furlong in this film is odd. Edward Furlong in this film, like, it's hard to really talk about Edward Furlong. Obviously has a controversial-ish past, definitely fell from grace a lot, kind of one of those Corey Feldman type child actors who kind of went down to like a little bit of a dark and strange path. I think Shannon Elizabeth is actually pretty good in this film. I've always kind of liked her as an actor. Mostly known for her comedic stuff, like she was in the American Pie films. You know, she's in a lot of Kevin Smith's stuff, hanging out with Jay and Silent Bob and whatnot. So I like her in this. I don't know if she was really the right choice for Angela, but I do enjoy her presence in pretty much any film that I've seen with her in it. It does feature cameos in the film. Obviously, Liana Quigley is in the film too. So, like, it does have a lot of things that are kind of going for it, but the film itself, it's so low budget feeling. It feels like there wasn't a ton of effort put into it, at least from what I can tell. Like, I can't tell if they were actually trying to make something good with this. It's kind of a weird sort of middle ground. Like, I wish that if you're gonna remake Night of the Demons, I think this was probably a little bit too soon to be remaking it, because, I mean, the last film in the franchise was only like 10 years prior to that. So I think, in my personal opinion, it's not a franchise that really needed remade that quickly. And it was something that was very, like, representative of the time, I guess. Like, that first 80s films feels so 80s, and even the ones that were made in the 90s feel like the 80s. Like, this one feels like it's completely, like, disconnected. I mean, as it should, it is a remake, but I would have rather had another Night of the Demons sort of sequel rather than a remake of it. I don't know. There's not really a ton to say about it. I wasn't the biggest fan of it. It's 1.5 stars, easily the worst out of the franchise. But if you guys have seen it, I would love to know something positive from the Night of the Demons remake that you like that I haven't mentioned already. What is your favorite thing from the Night of the Demons? Not only that film, but just tell me about Night of the Demons, the franchise, because as I said, I do want to kind of do a retrospective of the series at some point in the future. So I would love to hear what all of your thoughts were about the film. But regardless, that is going to wrap up the month of March. So we're a fourth of the way through the year of 2024 so far. And yeah, we're going to be moving on to the month of April. That's about it for this time, you guys. I hope you enjoyed this first edition of every single horror film I saw in 2024. We're going to pick this back up with the next coming months very, very soon. So with that, if you guys haven't already, make sure you're subscribing to the show wherever you're listening to it, leaving me a rating, a 5-star review, and a comment, and a like, and a share. And with that, we'll see you back here again for another episode coming very, very soon. So take care and stay spooky.